Here we go. All right, hello everyone and welcome. This is the 193rd Governance and Risk Call here at MakerDAO. My name is Peyton Rose. I'm a facilitator at the GovAlpha core unit, one of the governance facilitators for the organization. I go by Pros11 online, and we're here at our weekly Governance and Risk Call. As you noticed, this is being recorded, so hello if you're watching from YouTube later. This is a meeting where we get together, talk about what's going on with Maker, have some open discussions and dialogue, and just generally try to keep everyone updated and informed. So a few ground rules before we get started. Let's try not to talk over one another. There are a couple useful facilitation tools that will help me out with running the meeting. One of them is the raise hand feature on Zoom. You can find that under reactions. So if you would like to add a comment or a question after whoever's speaking is done, go ahead and use that raise hand function. Let me know I can call on you. Likewise, if you have something you'd like to add, but either can't or don't want to come on the mic, you can always drop your comment in chat. We'll circle through those. There is an agenda that we'll be showcasing here shortly. So I will try to keep us to that agenda. So if your comment or question doesn't quite fit in, we might table it till the open discussion section, but know that we will try to get to everyone's comments, questions, and concerns. I think that mostly covers the ground rules. We'll go ahead and get started with our agenda. So as usual, we'll start off with the governance roundup, talk about the votes that have taken place, go on to the Maker improvement proposals, as well as a look at what is happening on the forums. We do have a quick initiative update from me about prioritization sentiment polling. You might remember that being introduced a few weeks ago, and there's been an update, so wanted to get that out. And then finally, we have a pretty broad discussion topic today, so hopefully it should be good to get a lot of different voices and opinions in there. And that's going to be on visions for MakerDAO. All right, so without further ado, we'll hop right into the votes. It was actually quite a busy week as far as official governance goes. We had 8 polls that concluded. They all passed, and many with unanimous support, which is always interesting to see. We had a vault offboarding polls, 5 of them for 𝘰𝘰𝘮𝘰, 𝘰𝘰𝘰𝑒TH, 𝘰𝑤BTC ETH, 𝘰𝑉2 uni-ETH, and of course 𝑤BTC DAI. So all those, like I said, were successful. So I'll be giving a slide update on the next slide there. We also had a open market committee proposal, a proposal for modifying Oracle data models, as well as updating the expiration time for all oracles. On Monday, we had a conclusion of a green light poll for 𝘱. That winning option was no, so that will be marked as deferred and kind of updated in the collateral onboarding sheet. So that's some brief explanation polls. We'll go over to executive proposals. Last week, we did not have a new executive. However, the previous executive took a little bit longer to pass and execute. However, that did happen. That took care of the ESN threshold, adjusting the lid parameter, and some MKR transfers. Next week, partly due to all the polls, as well as taking a week off, we do have a bit beefier of an exec. It'll contain some CU budget items, the Maker Open Market Committee proposal I mentioned earlier. All those 5 votes for collateral offboarding will have their first step that involves setting their debt ceilings to 0 and then making an announcement before we take any further action. We'll have recognized delegate compensation and finally some changes for the StarkNet bridge. So a lot to review there. We will keep it updated as always. You can check out the new spells channel on our Discord to read the latest on how that development is going. All right, I think that should cover it for votes. So I will pass the mic over to 𝘊𝘁 for MIPs. Take it away, Pablo.
Yep. Thank you, Peyton. Hello, everyone. Pablo here with a MIPS update. So June's governance cycle begins on Monday 6th. We are currently in a gap week, so there's been no MIP-related regular events. What we did have, as Peyton mentioned, is 2 short ratification polls that entered the weekly cycle last Monday. We had 2 MIP-10 sub-proposals, that is, oracles-related sub-proposals. One modifies the data models for BTC-USD, LINK-USD, MANA-USD, USDT-USD, and YFI-USD. The other updates the expiration time for all oracles, reducing it which entails a reduction of costs. Both proposals passed with no negative votes. Now we'll take a quick look at the proposals currently in their frozen period. That is, proposals that have to remain unmodified if they are to enter June's governance cycle. We have two top-level MIPs, MIP 74, permissionless open market operations, which defines the process used to execute permissionless open market operations with funds controlled by MakerDAO, and MIP 75, task forces, which introduces groups responsible for coordinating high-level business decisions on behalf of the DAO. We also have as a proposal to onboard the very first task force, the Growth Task Force. We have two coordinated budgets, one for strategic finance for 1.4 million DAI, one for a growth coordinate with two alternative budgets, one for 5 million DAI and one for 4.2 million DAI. These two budgets incorporate new notions introduced by the recently amended MIP 40. We have the onboarding proposal of the Lending Oversight Coordinate, also known as LOV, led by Luca Pro. Next slide, please. Thank you. And as for facilitator on and off boardings, Psychonaut is aiming to become a facilitator for the Unified Core Unit. He's currently the deputy facilitator for that core unit. And Tomasz is stepping down from the role in data insights and hopes to be succeeded by Tadeo, for whom we have an onboarding proposal. We have one amendment, MIP 4 C2SP20 amends MIP 16, the weekly cycle MIP, to reflect the executive vote cadence change. And there's a special purpose fund for 10 million DAI. The idea is to experiment with various yield generation strategies. The pool is going to be managed by strategic finance under the supervision of the risk core unit and the prospective love core units. These frozen proposals will need to be formally submitted within the formal submission window, which opens next Monday and closes Wednesday end of day. To do that, just post a message under the proposals thread saying, I'm formally submitting this, if you're the author, of course. So let's do a quick recap of the proposals in RFC. We have one top-level MIP, MIP 72, which authorizes Six's Capital as a real-world asset arranger for MakerDAO. This proposal will not be entering June's governance cycle. And please go leave feedback on this proposal if you still haven't done so. There hasn't been much of it. Where are we? Facilitator on and affordings. So yeah, Patrick J. from GovAlpha, formerly known as Maker Breaker, submitted his MIP 40 C4, 41 C4. He aims to become a GovAlpha facilitator alongside Peyton and Long for Wisdom. We have two amendments. Although eligible in principle, the core unit of forwarding process amendment will remain in RFC for now, as there are still some rough edges that need polishing. And we have a MIP 4C2SP1, which amends MIP 0 to introduce the notion of retrospection dates for MIPs. So finally, let me remind you again that the formal submission window for June opens on Monday the 6th. New proposals to enter July's governance cycle should be posted on the forum by June the 8th, next Wednesday. And that's it from me. Thank you very much.
Appreciate it, Pablo. Always nice to have that rundown. Awesome. That'll bring us to our forum updates. I know we had a last minute dropout there, but nice part of a decentralized org. There's plenty of people to step in and take the mic. So I think I'll pass it off to David here.
Yeah, hey everybody. Today I'm going to be running through forum at a glance. So happy Thursday, everybody, and welcome to the forum recap. We're going to be covering the week of May 26th through June 1st. And I'm going to start us off with the week's announcements. So first of all, I'd like to welcome yet one more recognized delegate platform managed by two long-term MKR holders. and I'm sorry for butchering the names, 𝘰𝘰𝘮𝘬𝘳𝘰𝘮𝘬𝘳, and 𝘰𝘰𝘮𝘬𝘳. Oh, Jesus. And so, yeah, welcome. So GovAlpha has already scheduled a Meet Your Delegate call with them for June 8th at 5:30 p.m. UTC, which will feature both theirs and Chicago DAO's delegate platform. So anybody who's interested in getting to know more about them as delegates and their platforms, feel free to attend the call. Next up, we have Gala from GovAlpha announcing some important information regarding the recent passing of the MIP-40 amendment for core unit budget framework. And basically, there's a number of different things that this amendment changes for core units. Budget submission windows are now included in the MIP-40. Budget requests can only be submitted quarterly in March, June, September, and November. Budgets now have a maximum duration of 12 months and cannot start later than 3 months after being formally submitted. Budget requests are now required to provide more specific details regarding compensation and budget increases, and more. So check out the post for details. Moving into our discussions, Rune posted a comprehensive overview of the endgame plan, which contains the first 2 sections, which stem from a completed document that is yet to be released. He is still working on it, planning to be released in the near future. Additionally, anybody who wants to check out an even more compact summary of the endgame plan, recognized delegate RSPA posted such a document in the comments of that thread. So check it out. Next up on discussions, we have ADCV and team of wonderful authors who have helped connect and build over many of the recent posts and threads discussing growth, tokenomics, and burn. This post creates a growth strategy series where views and ideas are shared to the broader community to help gather more feedback. They discuss things such as foundations for a growth-oriented strategy, and then detail a potential roadmap consisting of 5 strong initiatives that I won't go over here, but can be found in the post or in the forum at a glance. Also, a big shout out to Strategic Finance's a call that's coming up this coming Tuesday, I believe. Yeah, sorry for not having the call details on hand, but there's going to be a strategic overview call similar to the past ones that they've hosted this coming week. So look out for that. And finally, in the interest of encouraging Maker contributors seeking to raise money to address issues raised by critics, Alice in MKR land submits an informal poll asking, 1, that any vote authorizing the sale of MKR require a 2 out of 3 majority to pass, that any vote, number 2, that any vote authorizing the sale of debt-like tokens or any form of giving yield requires a 2/3 majority to pass, and 3, MKR vesting, flap auctions, DSR, DECO, and any other programs already authorized or excluded from the requirement. And finally, 4, that if passed, these effects expire after 6 months. So yeah, lots of stuff going on in this thread. It's an informal poll, it's not a signal, so definitely go check it out and participate if you're interested. All right, so now we're going to move into our active signal requests. There are 4 active signals right now. So first up, Rama from the risk team submits a signal request replacing the previous signal by Andrew Bourbon to restart the burn. The signal is a trial of the new MIP-74, permissionless open market operations, which will now be tested for its effectiveness through the signal request. Risk believes it is now a critical time for the MakerDAO community to reach a consensus about what to do with the surplus buffer, and their solution to help maintain a sustainable surplus buffer, making sure it's higher than the current level to support risk mitigation and growth, while also burning a relatively small amount of the surplus buffer. So this proposal is something of the in-between that tries to satisfy everybody. So the signal ends on June 9th and currently sits at a winning vote of 43% being yes. So the next signal is coming from ACE, from the Strategic Finance Core Unit. It is about Velodrome, which is an AMM on Solidity as a public good that provides deep liquidity and low slippage to token pairs. And MakerDAO is eligible to receive an airdrop equivalent to 1% of the initial voting power for the new Velodrome protocol that's launching on Optimism on May 31st. So yes, a couple days ago. So the airdrop will allow Maker to direct emissions to liquidity pools of our choosing, thereby increasing liquidity of the pairs and receiving trading fees and bribes for those pools. So the Velodrome team requested to initially manage Maker's the NFT airdrop until their DAO is ready to manage it. They propose both DAI USDC and DAI OP pairs for the launch to ensure that emissions are high enough to attract liquidity. And so, yeah, in response, ACE is asking the community the following questions. Should MakerDAO incentivize the pairs recommended by the team? Should MakerDAO transfer the V NFT, which is our airdrop, to a governance-owned multi-sig using 𝘱𝘳𝘃? And what should MakerDAO do with the trading fees? So the signal ends June 9th. Currently sits at a winning vote of about 66% agreeing to incentivize the pairs recommended by Velodrome. So yeah, check that out for more details. Next up, Wingstick inadvertently sent 3.2 MKR to the MKR governance address and submitted a signal request to try to save it. Currently, it looks like it's no, because there's not much that governance can do. So yeah, that's pretty much where that sits. And finally, for our newest signal request, recognized delegate, just in case, introduces and defines the dust parameter, or rather reintroduces and reminds us what the dust parameter is. And additionally, he reminds us the last time the dust parameters were changed, we're back in December of 2021. And since then, gas prices have fallen substantially. And so in preparation of market sentiment returning to normal, just in case suggests and asks the community whether dust limits should be prioritized again for optimization. So the signal ends June 15th. And the current winning vote is abstained with 52%, followed by no, sitting at 38%. And so if you want more details on any of that, check out the written version of the forum at a glance. Yeah, I'll post the link right after I'm done talking. Thank you.
Right on. Thanks, David. I appreciate you stepping in. I saw Artem join from his phone while we were talking, so I thought you were still able to catch the call, Artem. Sorry about the tech issues. Right on. So yeah, that should.
Thank you. Thank you. Sorry about it, guys. I have my gas and electricity shut out perfectly at 12 p.m. here. Well, 1 p.m. I mean.
Joys of global workforce, I suppose. All right, well, that'll take us into the initiative updates, which I think is just me. Going to talk briefly about the prioritization voting, prioritization sentiment polling. Is that what I labeled it? So many names, I can never forget what I title things, but yeah. So if you don't mind clicking to the next slide there. Excellent. Prioritization framework sentiment polling. That's what I was missing. See, Patrick posts the link on there. Thank you. It's already got some great discussion, so maybe some of that will carry over to today, but didn't want to spend too long on this unless there are a ton of questions, just because we did introduce it briefly a few calls ago. But now that we're getting ready to go live, thanks to Kianga for the suggestion to cover it today. So as I introduced a few weeks ago, if you don't mind going to the next slide, David, the kind of problem space is essentially that the governance can pass a lot of things, right? Over 100 items have been passed and not really actioned on if you count all the individual green light polls and sentiment things and kind of various soft polling that we do. This is one way for MKR holders to tell core units what they think they should be working on, right? But the problem with it is essentially it can't define the prioritization. Basically just adds another one to the list, and the CUs try to figure out, all right, well, what are we capable of doing? What do we feel like would be a good use of our time? And then they come back and communicate that to the community. CUs obviously have a lot of methods for communicating their own priorities, right? They can do it in informal updates and say, hey, here's what we're working on this week, this month, this quarter. They can do it when they submit budget updates. They can say, all right, here's what we're going to use the funds for. And they can do it in cross core unit and other initiative update calls. MKR holders do not have that option currently. All they can do is pass or reject items as they get put up for vote in governance. So that's why this was a focus of GovAlpha and why we wanted to roll out this first trial. If we can go ahead and go to the next page. Excellent. So the implementation is going to be in the form of month-long polls on the voting portal. They will be taking the ranked choice format, essentially asking all MKR holders to rank their preference in terms of what items they would like to see prioritized. And then, of course, their voting weight will be applied just like it normally would in a poll there. Only issue with, well, not the only issue, but one slight issue with doing it this way is ranked choice polls are kind of hard to visualize, right? Like you can imagine a long output list from a bunch of different delegates. You can look at them individually and see very clearly what individuals wanted to prioritize, but when it all comes together, at least traditionally, you're just left with a single result, and that is the winner once a 50% plus consensus has been reached. So as a way of kind of counteracting that, we're going to be both kind of displaying and breaking down the winner on a 50% basis, as well as running to the natural conclusion of the instant runoff vote format. For those that are unfamiliar, the way that works is each round a vote takes place. Everyone's top preference is included on their vote. And then the last item is dropped off on each round. Again, traditionally, this is until you get to a point where at least 50% is in support of the top candidate. But in addition to doing that, we are going to run it to the end with running the instant runoff choices, dropping the last one, and that'll kind of give us a reverse order of how delegates and other voters rank their priorities. I know that's a bit complicated, so I'm trying to think of what other aspects might want to highlight. I guess the other important point is that we are going to be using multiple polls. So that way we can poll on specific items. So I'll have you go to the next slide here, David. The first of which is going to be the technical resource deployment. So this is essentially the idea that, hey, in terms of ideas and things we want to implement, some are soft or on the social layer. Some are perhaps on the procedural layer, but we'll start with the technical layer in terms of, all right, there are only so many people that can work on items that are going to be implemented into the code base. So what should they be spending their time on? So we came up with this list of 12 items, basically from things that have either been proposed to the community formally through a vote or through the ideation phase, and have basically captured sentiment or tend to pop up in one way or the other, as well as some input from relevant core units. To quickly go through the list, the Flapper distributor or upgraded Flapper, that's the idea of splitting funds, right? As revenues come into the protocol currently, either they go straight to the surplus buffer, or if the surplus buffer is full, they'll go into the burner. Flapper distributor could say distribute 25% to the burner, while 75 goes to the surplus. Obviously, that's just a random example. You could set it to a number of things, I'm sure. We have the Sagittarius engine. That's kind of the tokenomics framework that Room proposed. And then a broader category of collateral onboarding, put a pin in that because it'll come back later. We have the compound D3M, which is probably the D3M implementation we're the closest to, just in terms of core units, in terms of what has been voted in and worked on so far. Then there's MIP 43, which is the term lending module. That is another fixed rate option. Keep in mind we have like the Deco core unit who's working on a fixed rate solution as well, but MIP 43 was actually passed first, but never implemented. Then there's Maker Teleport. That's the idea of hopping DAI between L1 and L2 and eventually between other L2s. That is a prerequisite for other L2 deployments of MCD. Next, we have DSS Kiln. That is the mechanism for kind of using, I guess you would say, stagnated buying, right? You could basically set for token swaps. That could be used for buying the protocol ETH. It could be used as a different way to set up buybacks of MKR. Essentially, it's just a module that would allow the protocol to swap one asset for another over a predefined period of time. There's DSS Snog, which I was happy to see came up in the Discord today. That would be a method for kind of pushing some of the Oracle maintenance outside of just the executive spells. Next, we have DSS Gate. That's a mechanism for basically establishing like a sandbox, an area where people could develop with a limited amount of DAI exposure for a specific cause. So currently, we've seen that with Deco in terms of their experience and iterations on the fixed rate side, but that could be applied to a number of things. Next, we have the VOX, target price adjustment module. This is the idea of kind of negative rates. Hasn't come up for quite a while, but is one of the older technical MIPs that was passed in. Finally, we have emergency shutdown module simulations. Sorry, tripping over my words. This is the idea that right, we have this mechanism called emergency shutdown. People can submit to it. However, what would happen in emergency shutdown, we have a pretty good idea of, but we have yet to simulate. So that would basically be a technical load for trying to figure out how that process would work. And then finally, we have a technical solution for returning lost DAI, and kind of similar to the signal David brought up a little earlier today, this idea that people tend to send tokens to contract addresses. Coming up with a technical implementation for fixing that could be quite helpful. Cool. So that's a long list of items, and I do apologize for that, but hopefully that gives you an idea of at least what they are and why they were included. With the actual function of how the poll works. So in this individual poll, we would have voters rank their options. They would only rank the ones that they support and would like to see prioritized. And then at the end of the month, we would drop off the underperforming polls, essentially the last two, as well as any work that could reasonably be considered totally complete, and then replace them with new ones. So earlier I said, remember to put a little pen in the collateral onboarding, and that's because this is our first attempt to test this like nested poll options. So essentially in the first poll, you could rank where you would want the collateral onboarding prioritized. And then in the second poll, you could express sentiment on what types of collateral classes you would like to see prioritized. Idea being here, like if collateral ends up being towards the top of the list, you'd want to know which collateral you would want to be working on. So we have broader market-based demand solutions. 𝘰𝘰𝘮𝘰𝘮 D3M is a good example of that. Real world assets vaults, you can think of like 𝘂𝘂𝘃 or some of the traditional vaults like Success we have in place now, though Success might be slightly more of an arranger. So I'll stick with the 𝘂𝘂𝘃 option. Real world asset arrangers, we've seen the arranger model, the idea of basically lending to a group that then does further lending. Got core crypto collateral, that's BTC and ETH implementations and derivatives. Alternative Ethereum-based crypto collateral, so anything that's not ETH, but that's an ERC20. Crypto collateral from other chains. This could be L2s, this could be other side chains, you name it. Traditional instruments, bonds and treasuries, and finally, peg stability solutions. All right, so to kind of wrap it up, so that's a long description of what everything is. The idea is this will give MKR holders a way to input their preferences, and then core units will have some data to be able to say, all right, well, voters tend to like this solution, or they tend to think we should be focusing more on this. And then they can either say, all right, well, we agree and we're going to start working on that, or we disagree and we're not going to work on that, and here's why. So it's important to note that these are non-binding. It's simply a way to gather data and to have the MKR holders communicate some of their sentiments towards people actually building on the protocol. All right, I feel like I talked a lot and I missed a lot of chat messages. Are there any questions that haven't been addressed? I'm scrolling through now, but feel free to hop on the mic if someone wants to count one out.
So something that Kianga brings up in the chat is like a feeling of being overwhelmed by all of the choices. So the fact that it's challenging enough to keep up with actual votes and communicating the reasoning, but then on top of that, also trying to rank priority of like technical projects or collateral stuff. Like, yeah, total feeling of overwhelmedness.
I see Josh unmuted. If you want to add to that, Josh, feel free.
Yeah, I mean, I think it would be helpful to have maybe your voiceover. You just went through the slides and kind of described the background for each item, and probably we need that transcribed and expanded to inform the voters so they can make intelligent choices in the polls.
Yeah, fully agree. The short descriptions will be what's there for like the actual vote, but the text of the polls we're putting up will have broader descriptions as well as links to things to describe this. I do think it's kind of important to address the feelings of overwhelmedness, and perhaps we have like maybe too many options, or we could limit it to shorter polls in the future. This is kind of going to be our first go to see how this is working, and if this is like a viable model to continue developing or continuing to deploy some resources towards. On the flip side, I would say, you know, for core units, like the overwhelmedness, right, is shared, right, because these are all things that have been talked about, advocated for, or even passed by the community. So that is certainly a part of the goal of this is to try to get a little more focused input on what's really important out of all the things that have been discussed. So I saw a couple hands raised. I saw Tim's first, so I'll pass the mic to you.
Yeah, hi. So I actually think the list is actually not overwhelming. I mean, it's I totally get why 𝘱𝘰𝘮𝘳 is coming from that point, and honestly, I think two years back I would have been in the same situation. I think what's more important is that affected core units that have a particular interest in some topic being pushed forward, or maybe even put down from the list or put lower to list, actually advocate for that decision and basically point out why they think this needs some special treatment, some special attention. So the context is more visible for the ones who are actually voting on that stuff. So let's make an example. If Nadia would advocate for something that's really important from her growth perspective, and a delegate is saying, I'm pushing more on topics that are helpful for growth, then I don't know, they are for security, for example. That's a bad example, but you get my point. Then this is going to influence the decision-making process there. So I think what's vital with this is not necessarily that those items are the perfect items, but we have some space where people affected by this voting actually can make their point and advocate for that. So I don't know, maybe that there could be some kind of consolidated format where basically, I don't know, somebody will have a good idea how this could be visualized. But I think the list is pretty decent, actually. I think I would be able to work with that.
Appreciate that feedback. And just to briefly respond, I do think like core units have the ability to communicate, right? Like we organize these calls, we can kind of hop on and basically say, well, MKR holders are right now supporting this option, but we think that's a bad idea because we feel this is more important. So the hope is that the vote and these topic categories will kind of spur further discussion on it, and then we'll be able to work from there. I saw 𝘬𝘪's hand pop up, so if you want to take away, 𝘬𝘪.
Yeah, so I think this is really a great experiment. This is, in our discussions that we've had, one of the things that came up the most, which is, of course, the core units looking for clearer direction, what the priorities should be. So I think this is a very useful and needed experiment. There's one thing I'm wondering, which is the question of resource allocation is actually quite a technical question, as a planning technical question, right? So for example, the kind of questions that came up in chat, which is priority of a certain item depends on what's on the critical path, when it's needed, how much work it is, etc. And one way, and I think that's definitely a good idea, is indeed to make sure that the people who need to execute the work can provide the necessary context. But still, I think that maybe one thing we should really consider is to, instead of prioritizing technical solutions, is to prioritize challenges and problems and opportunities that we should focus on, and then what the technical solution is, the most efficient one, what the critical path is, whether it's useful or not to today allocate resources for it. That is more of a like I think a technical planning technical question, right? So for example, to take the example that was given in chat, so if let's say Deco is the absolute priority for MakerDAO, people want that, then still it could be that DSS gate it's not just doesn't make sense to work on it next week because maybe they only need it in 6 months, and maybe the work that needs to be done will I don't know, maybe there's some audit work that will push other important work aside while it's absolutely pointless to do it now. So instead of leaving that planning technical puzzle to the voters, I think yeah, one thing to consider might be to rather select a collection of high-level challenges, opportunities, problems that we need to focus on, and do the polling on that level, and then leave it to the yeah, to our organizational framework to come up with the right resource allocation mix to prioritize a certain challenge or opportunity to work on.
I think that's a great suggestion, Louder, and definitely one we considered, and I think would probably be appropriate. I guess if I could provide a little context on why we went with this implementation, was essentially to try to get some feedback as quickly as possible with actionable solutions. One worried about doing the broader categories for direction and that sort of thing was that, you know, let's say 𝘱𝘰𝘮 generation, right, is the winning option. Well, there's, you know, 10 different ways we could generate 𝘱. So having that poll may not necessarily help CUs allocate their resources. With that said, I think it would probably spur the discussion that I would get to that answer. So that probably is like a great starting point for the polls for our second run. Once we work out some of the kinks for this one. Another kind of intentional design decision was to make the technical role as specific as possible, and then have the collateral class or the collateral poll, which we chose to be collateral class, to be much more general. And that was to try to get feedback and say, all right, well, both CUs and voters, do you like the more specific list or do you like the broader list? And that'll also help us set up for future iterations of this. And then I think the only other thing I wanted to add was, like, since these polls are ongoing, the nice thing is, like, you know, we can kind of respond to them in real time. People can shift their sentiments as work gets completed or more information becomes available. Then voters can kind of respond to that. So the idea is that this is hopefully like a living feedback mechanism rather than just a static one. Yeah, go for it, Tim.
Yeah, but I mean, this holds true even for the approach that Walter is bringing up. So not voting on particular items on a to-do list, but instead of directions that we want to go. I'd actually also would favor the modus operandi that Walter is bringing up, but I mean, we can evolve to that at some point of time.
Yeah, and I wanted to add one more clarification there. So the point about prioritizing challenges and problems, that this does not give an instruction about which solutions should be built. I think to a certain degree that's a very valid point. But even on that level, there is a big difference between highlighting like a high level opportunity or a solution, and not specifying a specific implementation, at least, right? And this is often complicated because it's really a gradient. Yeah, some items on the list are already more high level than others, and yeah, also the interpretation of the vote So that's definitely like the level of detail I think is a valid discussion. I would, yeah, I hope that we can push it as high level as possible. But then the other thing is the interpretation of the outcome of the vote. I don't think the best outcome would be that the expectation is set that now everyone drops what they're doing and they're working on they just like literally start working on number one on the list because of the problem of the critical path that I mentioned. It's just not smart to work on some items if you don't need them soon enough. Like, for example, you might be very ineffective because information isn't available yet, or it might just be something that you can build it now, but you will only be able to use it in 6 months for some other reason. And so I think that maybe we should put some thought in the intended interpretation of the vote and how core units are exactly, how literally core units are supposed to work with the outcome.
Definitely. And
so I would like to interpret, like, if we have an outcome like that gives a list of priorities, to make sure that the critical path is executed as fast as possible, right? That for example is already more nuanced interpretation that I think leaves a lot more room for optimizing the plan.
Definitely. And like, again, the goal is like to spur conversation and to let this be a data source for core units to do, not to say, all right, well, voters express their sentiment, why aren't you following the list, right? Because there might be a mismatch in information, right? Something that's really important to voters, like maybe the CUs haven't realized that they haven't explained, why they haven't been giving updates or putting priority on that. I see Chris Mooney's hand next, if you want to take the mic.
Yeah, I just wanted to sort of say that a nice side effect of Wadder's approach, and granted, I think we can do whatever for this iteration, but a nice side effect of Wadder's approach is that we document, I think, across CUs and MKR holders and all the stakeholders, basically what we think the problems and opportunities are in general, even if we don't rank order them. There is an enormous benefit in just understanding that list. I know some of you in private conversations have probably noticed me talking about like generalized problems that Maker has, and I've been pushing the problems I see into your head so that when you're out reading research papers or seeing things in DeFi that might actually like be the perfect solution for one of those, like it pops up and then you can kind of surface it. And I think that can happen DAO wide if we just sort of push these like major problems that we have out. So it's a sort of nice side effect that we all get to think abstractly about that sort of problem / solution space. And yeah, and then ranking would obviously be like a bonus on top of that.
Awesome, that's great stuff. Really like that. Tim, saw your hand next.
Yeah, just a few points about this interpretation of this list thing. So the correct amount of anarchy in every system is above 0. And yeah, honestly, if something is losing the pole position and goes to place number 3, that doesn't mean that anybody should stop working. And it just, if you're top on the list, let's say we have DSS gate on the top of the list, and it's not on the critical path, that at some point Deco would basically have some material for discussion saying, hey, now it's going to the critical path, and since it's the top voted thing, go into some kind of fast forward mode with this topic. So we shouldn't be dogmatic about the interpretation of this thing. It's more about a temperature check and some kind of justification that somebody can put in discussion between a different CU that is focusing on a different problem, for example, or a different challenge. So I think that's the biggest thing for now. That would be good enough, I think. but we shouldn't be dogmatic, and nobody should stop working on topic number 2 just because topic number 1 is there. There is still some kind of common sense to be applied, let's say.
Awesome. And all this feedback is super valuable. Like I said, I think we're going to learn a lot from just trying to give this a go and seeing what results from it. So kind of appreciate the community's willingness to experiment. I know we do have a big discussion topic kind of following this, so I didn't want to take too much more time here. However, if there are urgent questions or concerns, I'll give one more chance for them to be brought up.
Yeah, hey, if I could, it's Eric. I like this, but when people think about collateral class sentiments and there will be voting, if you don't really present like what's the total addressable market, what's the risk, what's the technical implementation, what's the timeline, it feels a little too idealized and abstract, because ultimately these are all potential actions. They're going to have economic upsides or downsides, and they're competing in a certain sense. So if I was a big maker holder, I'd be like, all right, this is great, but like you got to guide me on the relative pros and cons and start lining them all up and ranking what you think is the best bang for your buck for the protocol. I mean, just saying I like real world assets better than core crypto doesn't say much. I mean, I need to really have an investment thesis around effort in both, or I'm just kind of talking, randomly. I mean, what I'm trying to get to is it needs to be an informed set of alternatives. And if it's not, I don't think you're doing much favor to anyone. It's like, what's the flavor of the day? I go to the ice cream store and I'm excited by a flavor. I don't have a deep insight into the pros and cons of the various choices. I mean, to me, that's a fundamental problem, because at the end of the day, the DAO in some sense needs to allocate resources and capital. You could just say capital, period, human capital or financial capital, whatever it is, across competing projects and priorities. And how do you decide what's in the best interest of the community? But how do they make informed decisions? Maybe I just like this one word better than another word. That's not a great way to vote. I mean, yeah, I think people really need to provide meaningful guidance to the community, voters on this, or I just don't think it serves a lot of help. I mean, I know the idea is good, but it's got to be informed, or it's not helping with the spiraling complexity. Let me put it that way. And I think there's a whole nother discussion that you're probably going to need more specialized delegates and voters, because not everyone can be an expert on everything. And some delegate might know half of these dead cold. They could help explain it. But ultimately, there's got to be a way to make informed votes, or we kind of end up being an idiocracy, which I don't think is a great way to plot the future. There, done with my rant.
No, I really appreciate those points, Eric. Thanks for hopping in. And yeah, definitely don't want to present this as a silver bullet. This is hopefully just the start of getting better prioritization input, and it'll be made better thanks to all y'all feedback. So thank you. Cool. So I think I will, or just to move on then, just so we can get to all the cool stuff David has prepared. There is the forum thread. Please do visit that and drop additional or reiterate these thoughts there if you want to continue the discussion. All right. David, were you planning to have Thomas lead this, or? Sorry.
No, it's me today. Yeah.
All right, take it away. I need to go plug in my computer. But
yeah, sure thing. By the way, Peyton, I did try to test the polling feature, because for a part, actually, when Peyton comes back, when I actually run the poll, we'll cross that bridge. But yeah, I might need you to run the poll for me. That's basically what I'm saying. All right, so what is up, everybody? Today, I want to ask, what is vision? And I know that vision is typically like a picture of an achieved end state. It's something that aligns people. It's something that acts as a guiding principle. Vision produces inspiration and motivation, and it really drives coordination in organizations. And visions are dynamic, and they end up changing with context often. And I know many of us in the room today have been inspired by one of Maker's many visions over the years. But the question is, which vision am I talking about? Because Maker has had several. And today, it seems, judging on the conversation in the community, it seems like there isn't really a clear vision anymore that everybody is really captured by. And so during this segment, we're going to be taking a very basic look at Maker's vision over the years, with the goal to explore which of Maker's historic visions are still in play, which have we already achieved, and also where are we heading. And a part of that is going to be just a series of 3 short polls, kind of asking people some of the foundational questions that were very important to the early days of Maker. And of course, discussion is invited all around with the goal of really aligning us on the greater context of vision at Maker. Because I think, understanding the history of it is really kind of the first step to understanding how we should try to drive the vision forward from this point on. So let me go through kind of a short history from my perspective. So the very first vision was solve volatility on the blockchain, right? Rune's classic 𝘰𝘮𝘪𝘯𝘢 post on the Ethereum subreddit kickstarted that, and that was back in March 2015. And then it turned into not only, do we solve volatility, that's just the stablecoin vision, right? Now we want to do it in the best way. We want to create the best stablecoin, a trustless stablecoin, one that's asset-backed, one that's censorship-resistant, a hard currency, right? And that was basically 𝘰 into 𝘠𝘪. That was, 2017-ish into 2018. And then as MCD came about and the DSR came about, the vision became, not only are we solving volatility on the blockchain and we're this really great stablecoin, but also we are Ethereum's decentralized central bank with retail accessible risk-free rate. And the idea is that we serve the underserved, right? We're financial services available for all. And so basically we were kind of this permissionless financial primitive in the landscape of the global economy. And then the vision was simplified because we realized that the one previous is a little hard, especially with rising gas costs. 𝘠𝘪 as an unbiased world currency. And I think this was kind of towards the tail end of the foundation's life. And this was an effort to kind of realign everybody around the central product of the Maker protocol, which is 𝘠𝘪. And then after that, there was Rune's case for clean money, which also kind of supported that idea of this is the best stablecoin. Not only is this something that solves volatility, not only is this something that's asset-backed and censorship-resistant, but it's something that actually can have pragmatic, positive effects on the world. And so there was this vision of, more real-world assets, and not just any real-world assets, but more ESG and clean money assets. And this wasn't I wouldn't say super central or macro, but it was an interesting and important vision that was introduced. And that basically leads us to where we are today, because since then, all of these visions to some degree have been fulfilled, some have not been fulfilled to their full extent, and some are just in straight up like research and development, right? Like real world assets, ESG assets, and even getting DAI to become that, trustless, like truly decentralized stablecoin. Like that's a lot of what we're seeing in the conversation around like the centralization of governance power right now and wanting more delegates. Like we really want the management of the protocol itself to be decentralized. And so, yeah, that brings us to where we are today. And so this, I think, was really helpful context for me to understand like where we've been and where we are today. And so the next part of this, I want to kind of ask 3 questions. So the first is Maker's primary goal to make DAI the #1 stablecoin? And Peyton, if you could run that poll for me, that would be great, because I don't seem to have that option.
Should be launched. Can
All right,
everyone see that?
yeah, I see it. Yeah, cool. It's very subjective, Juan. So Juan asks, how do we define #1? That's super subjective, but I'm just curious from like the highest level. is this like a goal? Like, does your mother think, you know what, I'm not going to use my credit card today, I'm going to use DAI? No, I'm just joking. All right, so looks like 27 responses. Thank you all for participating. Keep it up. We have about 50 people on the call, so shoot a quick answer, but it looks like 60% is yes, about 20% is no, and another 20% is abstain. Oh, interesting. So there should be a poll that's popped up. Let me actually go ahead and.
Yeah, I don't think everyone else can see the results.
Check other
until the
windows.
poll is running.
If you guys have multiple windows, sometimes the polling window pops up in a different screen.
Mm-hmm. You know what, let me see if I could, if there's an option on Zoom to share the poll results as well, like an overlay.
Yeah, it should just be one question there, Mariana. Split it into a few different polls.
Yeah. Okay, I'm happy to end the poll and just collect the results. There's about 33 people answered. I don't expect everybody to answer it, so it should be fine.
Sharing results now, so you should be able to see. Note with the UI David, we can't share the next poll until we stop sharing the results of the previous one. That was the issue earlier.
Yeah, no worries, no worries. And really, I'm just trying to get a temperature check, and I'm gonna kind of speak on it after, like, more or less, I want to kind of establish actually that a lot of people agree on the fundamentals where they think they don't agree, but like, yeah. Anyway, let's keep going. So let's stop sharing and let me move on to the next poll. So poll number 2 is: should DAI remain decentralized, censorship-resistant, permissionless, borderless money? And it's okay if you're mixed about any of these. They're meant to be really high level, like pretty subjective, like polls. But yeah, just temperature checks. Here it's 92% yes so far with 27%. Yeah, they're meant to be pretty loaded. Curious about the no's here. Who says no? There's one person that says no. Yeah, about 32 responses. Give it maybe 10 more seconds and we can close it out. These are meant to be pretty quick. Yeah, cool. I'm happy to share the results and close it out, pros.
Like a 5-second delay when you end poll, so sorry.
Yeah, no worries. Yeah, so it looks like an overwhelming majority do still believe that DAI should remain a decentralized, censorship-resistant, permissionless, and borderless money. Yeah, almost unanimous. All right, let's do the third poll and final poll. So should MakerDAO focus on the unbanked as a primary user? So one of the visions over the years has been to serve the underserved and to really utilize DeFi as this permissionless global financial tool. And so, yeah, interesting. So here, so far, of the 20 people who responded, 25 now, about 80% are saying no. Yeah, and of course, like the way that the question is asked needs to be put in context. So like, obviously the unbanked really can't be a primary user right now just by virtue of Ethereum, right? But in general, in principle. Actually, I should have probably asked the same question a couple of ways. That might be an interesting way we could play around with the utility of these polls. Yeah, because although they're not MakerDAO's primary user now, it might still be of value in the community to prioritize them as a very important user group in the future when we like scale to retail like products like L2s and stuff. All right, cool. Yeah, I'm happy to end it here. Yeah, so here is 12% yes, 70% no, and 18% abstain. So yeah, so I want to kind of open it up from here. So you guys have seen the vision so far, and I'm curious if, number one, is there anything missing? Like, is there any, actually, no, let me not ask if there's something missing. Let me rather ask, I think maybe it would be good to focus on maybe one of the more interesting polls. So I think between 2 and 3, those had kind of the most interesting results. So 2, should DAI remain decentralized, censorship-resistant, permissionless, borderless money? Like that was an overwhelming yes. But at the same time, there is aspects of the Maker protocol that are not necessarily decentralized. And that are permissioned, you know, like the real world asset stuff and all of that. And so I'm curious, how does this fit into MakerDAO's vision for the future? And how does it coexist, I guess, with the permission side of the protocol?
I'm really more interested in the poll number 1.
Yeah, let's go for it. All right, so is Makers, yeah, go for it. Yeah.
Yeah, sorry, this is a long discussion that I've been having with a lot of MKR community members that I feel that DAI as a stable coin, it's a byproduct of the protocol. It's not the main thing that we should push. And this is because, I've been working here for almost 5 years. I saw like every DAI use case that you could imagine. One of the first thing that I saw that's a total lie is serving the underserved. I mean, probably in the all little places of Latin America, and the underserved doesn't have the financial literacy to even understand what an application on the internet is, and even less what a cryptocurrency is, right? So serving the underserved is a total lie. It's just that thing doesn't exist, okay? And DAI being a stable coin, or us trying to, compete against USDC or USDT, it doesn't have any sense either. I mean, they are on ramps, right? We are a technological operative system for stablecoins. It's completely different thing. We're an over-collateralized thing, and USDC and USDT are just on ramps. I mean, they are financial companies. We're a technological entity. They are financial companies, and they have a growth rate and pace that we will match. I mean, in any time, right? Anytime. Then you have to understand how financial market works. And this is one of the things that sometimes amaze me, that not many people know. But when you talk about OTC companies, when you talk with banks, when you talk with financial companies, they sold their mother for 1 basis point of rebates. And we can compete with USDT and USDC in that regard. We will always be more expensive. We will always have less supply than USDT and USDC. It's really way, way, way different what they do to what we do. Okay? So that is why I always said that our main focus is not to make DAI the #1 stablecoin, but to make the Maker protocol the easiest and the cheapest way to get credit. Then we can fill the world with DAI, because that stablecoin level, that it's a liquidity game, not a demand game. No one demand the stablecoins. No one demands, only emerging markets. Here in Argentina, we had the shittiest economy in the world. We demand that because our peso is shit, you know? But if you talk about volume and the things that matter, no one in the world demands stable coins. There's only liquidity, not demand. And liquidity, you know, it's just a thing of time. If we make the Maker protocol and MakerBots the best thing to get a decentralized credit, we will fill the world with DAI. And I think that's our goal, not to make DAI the number one or whatever thing that because it's decentralized, people will choose that. No one is choosing decentralization over liquidity. No one. It's always come first liquidity and then decentralization. And I think that us as a community, we have to be, you know, all together in this idea, because if not, we will have like all this dispersed effort thinking or acting in a wishful thinking way, saying the DAI is the best thing when it's not. The best thing needs to be the MakerBots.
Yeah, thanks for that perspective, Mariano. That really resonates with me. Like, I've always thought about the Maker protocol as having like three main lines of products, which was, you know, the stablecoin, DAI, and then it was vaults, and then it was oracles. And I thought, okay, these are the three sort of verticals that that MakerDAO has. But yeah, I definitely, your view resonates with me pretty deeply.
I think it kind of circles back to user experience, right? Like at the end of the day, the people using your product care about how smooth it is. I think that's why, not to throw any other chains under the bus, but we see these adoptions of chains that you know, have some fundamental problems, that don't lack decentralization, that can't stay up all the time, but we still have users flocking to them because they're cheaper, they're quicker, they're easier to understand. And I think the complexity problem isn't just present for our core units in our organization, but it falls down to the end user as well.
Yeah, I mean, I remember. Sorry, go for it, Chris.
Yeah, I was just going to say I'm actually I don't totally disagree with everything that was said there. Is your I think your mic's on, David. I got like noise in the background. Yes, so I don't disagree with everything that was said there. I actually do care very much about DAI being the sort of the number one global unbiased world currency. I mostly just because I have certain conjectures about where I think the future is headed. I think we get little snapshots of exactly what's coming. I think that the future is going to be littered with central bank digital currencies, and that there's going to be, they in particular are probably going to be some of the worst possible things that humanity's ever experienced in terms of like liberty and freedom. Our ability to transact is essential to exercising our rights. And you can already see with many of the movements with sort of global sanctions regimes, you know, where exactly things are headed. So in this particular moment, I actually kind of agree, like DAI maybe doesn't have that use case, but I think that in the longer term vision, that's exactly the type of user we should be targeting. And I think there are other probably technical problems on the way there that make it so it's not viable, but that means that we should be looking for sort of technical solutions that make things cheaper for end users. And specifically, I care very much about users that are non-technical altogether. I know some of you have heard me talk about this idea of coming up with a system where like users can basically print DAI notes on their home printers and then exchange them with their neighbors. So I think there's a lot of innovation, and I think the world is going to need a solution to that problem. But the bigger problem in the short term is, you need to actually balance the equation. You can't just have like insane amounts of DAI adoption without being this sort of like decentralized permissionless credit facility for people, because you need to actually increase supply, and of course you can't increase supply without increasing demand. And so it turns out like there's actually this kind of double helix sort of dance that we have to do with supply and demand on the way there. So we can't just like immediately like start minting all kinds of DAI for real world assets and dump it on the market, because basically we'd break the peg and we wouldn't have the capability of sort of balancing that supply and demand. And so, yeah, I mean, I'm just maybe adding color to it, but yeah, I don't know, just but my 2 cents on the other side of that debate, I guess. But it's showing that this is a good conversation to have, because maybe our visions are not aligned, or maybe we have to talk about timeframes when we talk about vision alignment.
Yeah, I think the question is like mostly time frame, because I feel like focusing on the vault as a very important or even central product, like at this stage of the protocol, might not be the worst idea in the world, right? Like improving the user experience on every level at the Maker protocol, both governance, auctions, drawing DAI from a vault, etc. And the actual vaults that we have, everything might just be leading up to the day that a permissionless, decentralized, trustless, all that censorship-resistant currency is really needed by the world, which is that future that you're foreseeing, Chris. Yeah, I kind of see those things as flywheeling each other almost, and it's really the time is the nuance to detail here.
Yeah, hi, it's Eric. I wanted to say a few things. It's a great topic. One, I think it's a fair question, is DAI, like, do we want DAI to be the #1 stable coin, or do we want DAI to be, the #1 decentralized stable coin, which is a different question. But I think the other thing I do want to stress, having spent too much time in different ventures over the years, I think there's a substantial economy of scale and network effect to these types of cryptocurrencies. I think people know this, but let me say it anyway. And at the end of the day, I don't see like you're going to have dozens of currencies at scale. I mean, I think there'll probably be a handful, but the bigger ones are going to just kind of dominate, and I think the other ones are going to die on the vine. So when I look at this, I think we should be promoting active DAI demand growth, organic demand growth, however we do that. But when I look at the risks to us, I sometimes think that one of the biggest risks is not growing fast enough. I'm not saying grow stupid, but if we're really safe and conservative and don't grow DAI demand aggressively, some other folks are going to grow demand for their currencies, and we could just shrivel on the vine because we never hit, really hit scale with huge network effects. I mean, so much of what we want to do in the long term, I think depends on having a business at scale, that's really working well. It's great to have all these other visions, and I like them, but when you're still trying to get to scale, I think it's premature to focus on too many other things. You really want to work on getting to be the #1, some type of coin. I mean, is it the #1 DeFi coin? We can, I think, argue about that, but if we don't, really have a vision of how to build this big and hit network and economies of scale, I think there's a real risk it's not going to make it to scale. It'll never be that. It's just not going to get to be able to do any of these broader visions if it doesn't get big into scale.
All right, judging by the silence, let's move on to poll number 2. So should DAI remain decentralized, censorship-resistant, permissionless, borderless money? So this one had like almost complete unanimity, but I think the feeling in the community has been that some aspects of this are being sacrificed for the sake of growth. So I'm curious, Does anybody have thoughts on that?
Maybe I can constrain the discussion a little bit here, because 𝘳, the token itself, the thing that, let's say these end users that are going to have all this demand for, the token itself that they exchange is the thing that specifically should have these attributes, right? I think there's an argument that we should probably also have these attributes for 𝘳 generation, so for vaults, right? So the thing that actually creates 𝘳. But the technical reality is that it's pretty much impossible. I mean, it's not impossible. It pretty much would just mean like the protocol goes completely immutable today if we were to yank, let's say, governance permissions on the core of MCD. So it's almost like we can't really even. I mean, maybe in a longer term vision, we can talk about that for vaults for having these attributes, but I think in this case, we're just talking about 𝘳, right? So does anybody see any future compromises or anything that would compromise these attributes on the 𝘳 token itself?
No, 𝘱𝘭𝘪, raise your hand. I don't know if that's a related topic or if we should try to answer this and then come to you.
I'm not sure. I think it's connected as maybe an answer, Chris, which is, I'm kind of thinking about this as, I love this as, I hate to use the expression North Star, but like as the core value or vision, but then it's like, okay, what's the strategy? And then what are the tactics? So like to Eric's point, is this like the core that needs in anything we decide in any time frame? It's like, all right, let's check to make sure that in the future we're protecting this attribute at the core of what will exist in the world. And then really then think about, can we iterate, different models, different types of 𝘳, like maybe it'll be 𝘳 that's clean or 𝘳 that is permissioned to serve a certain market, but can we evolve that while still providing this central function to the world of the permissionlessness? Will at some point because if we dominate in a permissioned centralized coin, that's not necessarily the kind of network effects or moat that maybe we want to achieve, but perhaps there's some strategy or, kind of timeline that says, different versions of 𝘳 or different versions of business lines will help us get there. So I think this is a great conversation. And I feel like we do need to take the vision then back to kind of tactics and strategy, right? But for me, yeah, I mean, goal number 2, this idea that if we all disappeared tomorrow, would there be something in the world that's operating and serving humanity, if that doesn't sound too absurd?
I got my hand up. So I think this is kind of the critical issue, honestly, because when I've been digesting kind of the struggles at Maker, I see us wanting to grow dramatically, and I also see various elements of centralization really dramatically creeping in, right? I think it's one of the reasons with my growth vision, I wanted to focus on, let's do a dramatic change with Maker 3.0 and use multiple Maker incarnations to achieve different goals and synergize, right? That we could have the decentralized Maker that does this stuff here in number 2, right? And we can synergize it with a Maker 3 that has totally centralized stuff, right? Or whatever, to grow massively and drag Maker 2 with it, right? This is really the core question that we've been struggling with, between fighting in a way, trying to maintain this and do a lot of growth. And I think it's a really important discussion to have. And we need to solve it. Otherwise, we're going to continue to struggle. We need to solve this core issue and resolve it in a way that we can drive forward with the strategy and goals to get to what we are trying to achieve. And if we have two sets of goals, that's why I said like two sets of makers might work for that, right? They can synergize off each other. I don't know, it's just an idea.
Yes,
yeah, I wanted to sort of add some context because, you know, DAI itself is a fungible token, right? But we all know that that's a little bit of a lie that we all tell ourselves with Bitcoin and DAI and all the other sort of ERC-20s that aren't perfectly sort of privacy preserving coins, because you can always sort of determine where the source of funds is. And I think so long as DAI is sort of open and introspectable and transparent, there is going to be, let's say, markets that may pop up where all the participants in that market, let's say, are KYC'd or institutions that have gone through the sort of rigor of KYCing. And it is certainly possible that for that market, we can allow sort of pristine DAI to be minted. That is such that there's no kind of counterparty that would need to be kind of KYC'd, right? And so we sort of do get at least this sort of narrow focus of if there's a market that requires sort of permissioned actors, you do have the flexibility to sort of make a either a vault or some sort of DAI generation mechanism for those markets where the DAI itself still has those attributes where it's permissionless and censorship resistant, decentralized, but it would be injected directly into those markets. And so I don't know, that might help. I think that kind of starts to answer maybe both of the sort of previous discussions, but where Maker itself doesn't have to compromise on those values for DAI, which I don't think it ever should. But where we can also possibly, like, you know, have a role in those markets as well. So.
I do see that we're at the top of the call. Peyton, do you want to extend it a bit, or are we cool kind of ending it here?
Yeah, I mean, I'm down to keep it open for a few more minutes if there's other comments or things to add for sure. But definitely appreciate everyone sticking with us on the longer one.
Yeah, hey, it's Eric. I think Chris has a spot on point where the principle is we definitely want permissionless, but we haven't seen the regulatory actions by the big countries yet. And this is very theoretical until we actually see the EU or the US or someone make a big change, and we can be presented with, we're out of the market completely if we stay 100% pure, you know. And then to Chris's suggested way where you kind of split the difference, do you find a way to still be relevant in that market, or do you stay true to your underlying principles and completely leave that market? I mean, I think that's a really good question. I mean, I think I would tend to want to find a way to work with that market if it's a big one, because I think as you start to move away from big markets, you should start losing relevance, you know, as long as you're not giving up kind of your core values. That's an important question.
I don't think where markets are headed in the future, at least in the traditional sense, is anything that anyone's going to want to participate in. I think we're much better off to try and build a better financial system, even if that means for some years we might need to languish in like irrelevancy. I believe that this entire thing is going to get so captured that it's going to be such a blight on human liberty, especially as we give like centralized powers the ability to determine what you can and can't spend money on, who they do and don't take money from, like who can and can't exercise their rights. I think for the most part, we need to be building the escape hatch. And when they go to basically lock that cage around everyone, I think Maker should be firmly outside of it.
Yeah, it's like the whole value prop of crypto. But yeah, really good context for Maker.
To your point, kind of kicking off the conversation, Chris, there are a lot of different vectors, right, where we could come under attack, not only from the collateral, but from our organizational structure, you know, our smart contracts, our kind of social entanglements as well, right? So it's definitely something we have to stay vigilant on, and I appreciate conversations like this for aligning the vision and helping bring up some of those risks.
Yeah, if anyone wants to watch a great talk from sort of the early days from 𝘱𝘳𝘃 in 2019, Andreas Antonopoulos gives a great talk on the difference between can't and won't, right? So this is the TLDR is basically we have to be able to say we can't do something as opposed to we won't do something, and because eventually the pressure is going to get so great that won't isn't going to cut it. And so this really does come down to, at least for DAI, I think it comes down to answering those questions and sticking to it. For vault generation, we're certainly in a won't scenario, but there are a number of technical strategies we could employ to be in a can't scenario as well. So
basically we're at a point where we have to define the core and lock it down, essentially.
I think that's a key question, and I think that should go to the Maker voters. I think that's going to be a hotly debated question, honestly. You know, there's going to be a lot of big Maker holders who are going to see that as profit minimizing, and I think might not be on board. I mean, I'm a bit agnostic myself, but yeah, I would definitely think that needs to be well debated and fully voted on, because that has strong implications on kind of short, medium term growth and profitability.
All right, well, I think things are quieting down, and I do feel bad for going over, but really appreciate all the discussion that went into today's call. And yeah, definitely a good shout there on using polls like a before and after. This was, at least for our end, very fun to experiment. It seemed like it kind of helped spur engagement. Please do consider leaving feedback both on the forums and our Discord. But yeah, we'll continue to iterate and hopefully make for even more engaging and better feedback loops for these calls. Anything else you want to add to close this out, David?
No, nothing for me. Just actually maybe one note. Just yeah. So I'm trying to do my best to ask great questions, and so I know I already send some of the stuff I prepare for this call to a handful of people. If you're interested in playing a more active role in giving feedback and improving the slides, GovComms has a budget for contributors, and if you want to take an hour out of your week and help us ask better questions around pertinent topics, please reach out to me.
Awesome. Well, I think we'll wrap up there. Thanks for joining us. We'll be around same time, same place next week. And like I said, please continue the discussions, continue feedback, and thanks everyone for giving us some of your time today. Thanks.